She had just lost her husband and given birth to twin boys, but instead of support, she was cast out by his own family. Her in-laws blamed her for their son's death and treated her children like a curse, turning their backs without a trace of compassion. But when a stranger witnessed her standing alone on that porch, he said 6 words that would change everything. "You're coming home with me." And wait until you see how this powerful story turns, and why justice in the end didn't just return, it triumphed. The Texas sun was merciless that afternoon, but Emily Reeves stood motionless on the edge of the dusty porch, clutching her newborn sons against her chest. Her bare feet rested on splintered wood, her thin hospital gown already soaked through with sweat. Her arms trembled, but she held the twins close, as if her touch alone could shield them from the voices behind her. "You've done enough," came the sharp voice of Rachel, her late husband's sister. "You think you can stay here, feeding off this family just because you had his children?" She pointed an accusing finger at the infants. 2 boys, no father. It's shameful. Emily didn't speak, not because she had nothing to say, but because her words no longer mattered here. Since the moment her husband David passed unexpectedly 2 months ago, the home she once thought was hers had turned cold. The warm dinners, the quiet laughter in the living room, the safety she once felt, vanished. Now, only blame and disdain remained. One of the babies whimpered. Emily instinctively shifted her weight and rocked slightly, whispering a lullaby under her breath. Behind her, the front door creaked. Heavy footsteps approached, then stopped short. "You're not welcome anymore," said Harold, David's father. His tone was low, steady, too steady. "We took you in because of David, but David's gone. These boys are not our responsibility." Emily looked up, lips parting slightly in disbelief. Just days ago, they had placed flowers at their son's grave together. She had cried in Rachel's arms, and now, this? She turned toward the driveway, scanning for anyone, anything, but the street was quiet. A curtain fluttered across the road. Someone had seen, but no one came. From the distance, a faded pickup truck slowed to a stop. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, mid-30s. His name was Nathan Holmes. He didn't live in the neighborhood, but worked with a local outreach program for widows and vulnerable families. Someone had called in an anonymous tip about a mother and 2 infants being pushed out of their home. He wasn't prepared for what he saw. Emily, pale and shaking, stood alone. Her hair was tangled from stress, her hospital band still on her wrist. And behind her, 2 adults looking on without remorse. Nathan's expression darkened. He approached slowly, his boots crunching against the gravel. "Is everything okay here?" he asked, keeping his voice even. Rachel crossed her arms. "This is none of your business." Nathan didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on Emily, and more importantly, the quiet desperation behind her calm. He stepped closer. "Ma'am," he said gently, "do you need help?" Emily hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. Nathan turned toward the others. His voice dropped an octave, calm but firm. "She's coming with me." Rachel scoffed. "You don't even know her." "I don't have to." He turned back to Emily. "You and the babies, get in the truck." Emily blinked, unsure whether to believe him. But when he extended his hand, there was no pity in his eyes, only resolve. She took one cautious step forward, then another. Behind her, no one called her back. Nathan opened the truck door, cleared the passenger seat, and gently helped her in. The twins stirred, sensing the change. Emily settled in, still silent, still stunned. As Nathan pulled away from the curb, a thin trail of dust rose behind them. Emily didn't look back. Not once. The road hummed beneath the tires of Nathan's truck. Emily sat rigid in the passenger seat, the babies asleep in her arms, their tiny heads tucked under her chin. She didn't speak. Neither is necessity, nor from fear. She simply didn't have the strength to form words. Nathan glanced at her once. He could see the shadow of dried tears on her cheek, and the way her hands trembled ever so slightly, even as she held her children with practiced tenderness. He didn't ask questions. Not yet. The silence between them was not empty. It was full of things that hadn't been said for a long time. The shelter stood at the edge of town, tucked between a church and a worn-down community center. It wasn't much from the outside, a modest 2-story building with peeling white paint and a porch swing that creaked in the wind. But inside, there was warmth. 2 women met them at the door. One was middle-aged, with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair. The other, younger, wore a badge that read, Amara. Neither of them asked why Emily had no shoes or why she flinched when the door behind her closed too loudly. Instead, they offered her a blanket, a chair, and a cup of lukewarm tea that tasted like chamomile and safety. Emily barely touched it. Her gaze stayed locked on the twins. "They haven't eaten since this morning," she finally whispered. Amara nodded and quietly brought formula. One of the babies began to fuss, and Emily, still clutching the second, shifted the first into her arms and fed him with the ease of someone who had done this 100 times. Without comfort, without help, just instinct and devotion. Nathan sat nearby, not interfering, only watching. Later, as the babies finally fell asleep in cradles borrowed from the nursery, Emily stood in the dim hallway just outside their room. Her fingers clutched a folded piece of paper, creased so many times the ink had started to fade. Nathan approached her, slower this time. "You all right?" Emily nodded once, then held out the note. It was a letter, handwritten, with the blocky, determined handwriting of someone who never liked to say much. "If something happens to me, don't let them scare you. You're their mother. You're everything they need." It was signed simply, David. Her voice broke for the first time. "He made me promise I'd stay strong, that I wouldn't give up, but they treated me like I didn't belong anymore." Nathan took the paper and handed it back gently, like it was made of glass. "You do belong," he said. "Not to them, but somewhere." Emily turned to the nursery window and watched her children sleep. Their small chests rose and fell in rhythm. Their existence, fragile and miraculous, was proof that there was still something worth fighting for. "I don't want pity," she said, eyes still fixed on the crib. Nathan's response was quiet. "You won't get it here." And just like that, something shifted. Not completely, not suddenly, but it was there, the first thread of something stronger than fear. Not hope, not yet, but the beginning of it. By the third morning at the shelter, Emily noticed something different. She hadn't woken up in fear, no raised voices, no footsteps slamming down a hallway. Just the soft creak of floorboards somewhere nearby, the distant sound of the kettle boiling in the kitchen, and the steady breathing of her two sons curled beside her. She sat up slowly, careful not to wake them. The boys were bundled in warm blankets now, one with a stuffed dog nestled against his cheek, the other clutching the edge of her shirt even in sleep. Emily reached over and gently adjusted their collars. She didn't smile widely, but there was a faint lift at the corner of her mouth, as if her heart had exhaled for the first time in weeks. Nathan arrived around noon. He brought paperwork in a manila folder. Nothing urgent, just a few resources. Legal aid contacts, information about housing programs, and a letter from a community foundation willing to sponsor a portion of her rent for 6 months. "You don't have to do anything today," he said, setting the folder on the table. "But you've got options, and that matters." Emily didn't touch the papers at first. For too long, documents had meant trouble. Bills, demands, notices. She'd learned to fear envelopes. But these were different. There was no pressure in Nathan's voice, no expectations in his eyes, only quiet assurance. "I thought I didn't have anywhere else to go," she said softly, not looking up. "And now, I don't even know what to call this." Nathan leaned back in the chair across from her. "Call it whatever feels right. A start, maybe." That word, start, sat with her, heavy and fragile at the same time. Later that evening, she stood at the window of the nursery watching the twins sleep in matching cribs donated by a local church. Their tiny hands rose and fell with each breath. On the wall, someone had painted a quote in delicate blue letters. "Sometimes, the smallest steps in the right direction end up being the biggest of your life." She stared at it for a long time. The next morning, she asked Amara, one of the shelter staff, if she could help in the kitchen. Just something small, folding napkins, stirring soup. Amara gave her an apron and said, "Of course." That afternoon, Emily laughed quietly at something another woman said in passing. It caught her by surprise. She hadn't heard her own laugh in weeks. And when Nathan dropped by again, this time without papers, he found her sitting in the garden behind the building, holding one of the twins and pointing at a butterfly resting on a daisy. "You're early," she said without turning around. He smiled. "You're smiling." She looked down at her son, whose tiny fingers had reached toward the wings of the butterfly before it fluttered away. Then she nodded. "Yes," she said. "I think I am." The courthouse was colder than Emily expected. The walls were painted beige, the lighting fluorescent and impersonal, yet the air carried a quiet intensity, like the room itself was holding its breath. She sat in the front row beside her attorney, her hands clasped together in her lap. Her fingers fidgeted with the edge of her sleeve, but her posture stayed upright. The twins weren't with her that morning. They were safe at the shelter with Amara. She didn't want them anywhere near this. Across the room sat the family that had once called her their own, Harold, Rachel, and David's uncle, all dressed in pressed clothes, their expressions unreadable. They hadn't expected her to fight. Maybe they still didn't believe she could, but today was different. The judge entered and proceedings began. At first it was all structure and formality, documents read aloud, timelines reviewed. But then came Emily's testimony. She stood, walked to the front, and faced the court. Her voice was quiet, but unwavering. "I never asked for sympathy," she said. "Only respect. I married into a family that promised to protect me. After my husband passed, I didn't become a burden. I became invisible, then unwanted." She paused, steadying her breath. "When I gave birth to our sons, I hoped that something would soften, that love would outweigh fear. But instead I was treated like an obligation, or worse, a mistake. I was pushed aside for bringing life into the world." There was no bitterness in her voice, only truth. The judge leaned forward slightly, listening. Her lawyer submitted photographs, medical records, and a copy of the letter David had written. The court went quiet when the judge read his words aloud. "If something happens to me, please take care of Emily and the boys. They are my whole world." What followed wasn't dramatic. There were no outbursts, no raised voices, only facts. And facts were powerful enough. When the ruling came, Emily gripped the sides of her chair. The court awarded her full legal guardianship of her children and granted her sole rights to the property her husband had shared with her. More importantly, a formal no-contact order was placed against his extended family. They were not to interfere again, not in her life, not in her son's. Emily didn't cry, not then. Instead, she exhaled slowly and stood. Outside, the air was warmer. A few local reporters waited nearby. Nathan was there too. He hadn't gone inside, but he had waited the whole time. She walked toward him, her steps calm and grounded. "How'd it go?" he asked. She handed him the court slip with the ruling. Nathan read it, then looked up with a slow, quiet smile. "You did it," she nodded. "We did." The photo taken that day would go on to be shared across social media by advocacy groups and community leaders. In it, Emily stood just off the courthouse steps, one arm resting on the handle of the stroller, the other holding the legal packet to her chest. Behind her, Nathan stood a few paces back, not in front, not beside, but where she needed him, as support, not a savior. And in her expression, there was no pride, no arrogance, only peace. Because she hadn't just won a case. She had reclaimed her voice. 2 years later, the garden behind the shelter was filled with color. Lavender, daisies, and bright chalk drawings left by children who now felt safe enough to play. Emily stood near the bench where she once sat in silence, now watching her sons chase each other between flower beds. Their laughter was the kind that filled empty spaces. She worked here now, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to. Helping other women find their feet felt like purpose, not obligation. She met them at the door, remembered their names, and listened without judgment. Her office was small, with soft light and crayons scattered across her desk. A single photo sat beside her computer. Her, the twins, and Nathan in the background, just slightly out of focus the way he preferred it. He never pushed, never took credit, but he always showed up when it mattered. Sometimes they talked late after shelter meetings, about the boys, about second chances, about planting things that grow slowly but last. One afternoon, a woman arrived at the shelter with a baby in one arm and a duffel bag in the other. Emily brought her tea, settled her in a quiet room, and sat nearby while the woman stared at the floor. "I don't even know where to start," she whispered. Emily smiled gently. "You don't have to know. You just have to keep going." That night, as the boys drifted to sleep, one of them stirred and mumbled, "Are we staying here forever?" Emily tucked the blanket around him, brushed his hair back. "Yes," she said softly. "This is home." And for the first time, she believed it completely.